Hi guys, it's Despa. Welcome back to Resin Belle. Thank you so much to all my subscribers. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and that like button and that notification bell so you know when I post a video next. Today's video is going to be on the different types of resins. I'm going to go over as many different kinds as I have available to tell you about, and one more that I don't. So stay tuned for that in just a minute. Okay guys, let's get into this. The first category of resins I'm going to talk about is epoxy resin. There are two main types of resins. There's epoxy resin, which is usually a two-part resin that you mix the two parts together, and the two parts form a chemical reaction that causes it to cure and harden. The second kind is a UV resin, and that is cured with a light source, no mixing involved. So the first set of resins I'm going to talk about is Amazing Clear Cast. This is the resin that I use most often. I like the way it cures. I like the way it is pretty forgiving as far as, you know, if you measure it, you know, when you're measuring it, you don't have to be exact. I mean, it's better if you do, but it's a little more forgiving than some of the other resins I've tried. It's a good all-purpose resin. It works in silicone molds. It doesn't burn your mold by getting too hot or anything like that. It always seems to cure very well to a nice hard coat. So you know, it's a good general purpose resin, and it is readily available. You can get it at like Hobby Lobby, you can get it on Amazon, you can get it a lot of different places. So it is a good general purpose epoxy resin. Now generally it has a side A and a side B, and you would mix them in the proper proportions, and usually for each different resin it will say you know, what it is, how to mix it. This, like on the back, this one says mix 1:1 by volume. So different resins have a different way of measuring them. Some measure by volume, some measure by weight, such as this Sophie and Toffee resin. This is a 3:1 resin, and you measure this one by weight. So you have to have like a little scale when you're pouring it in. You would put 3 parts of this one, so let's say 3 grams, and then, you know, this one you would put 1 gram. So, you know, it's 3 of this one and 1 part of this one by weight. These are by volume, so you would put 3 milliliters and 3 milliliters, because these are 1:1 by volume. So one milliliter and 1 milliliter, and you'd mix those together to get your correct cure. Sophie and Toffee also has a 1:1 resin, and it will always say somewhere on your label 1:1 or 3:1, so you got an idea of how you need to mix your resins. Sophie and Toffee makes a pretty decent resin. You know, they're 3:1 resin. If you are the kind of person that wants more time, the Sophie and Toffee 3:1 resin is a good option for you because it takes a long time to cure. Sometimes, you know, it says 24 to 48 hours, but usually it's, you know, on the further end of that. So, you know, it kind of gives you a little bit more time to work with it, a little bit more time to mix things, a little more time to pour. So, you know, but then you have to wait longer. So it's up to you, you know, how you want to work that. Also the other thing about resins, no two resins are exactly the same. They're very similar, but they're not exactly the same. Different ones will have different safety precautions. Different ones will have different work times. They'll have different cure times. So you've really got to pay attention to the instructions on the exact brand that you're using. There's no one answer that covers every single kind of resin, so you have got to do your research and your homework and find out what you're dealing with, what you're using, the chemicals that you're using, the safety precautions that you need to follow to be safe while using resins. Some resins are very toxic, and you know, you've got to be covered up. You got to be gloved and masked and all that. You know your resins. I'm going to go over safety in another video, so stay tuned for that one. So I think that's about it. Oh, and there's this is another kind of epoxy resin. This is called ice resin. I don't have the package, and it's not usually yellow. This is like a really old package that I had in storage for a long time. This is called ice resin. And you can get it like at the jewelry section of like Hobby Lobby and stuff. You can get it online from Ranger Ink. It is a 2-part epoxy resin, and it comes just like this in this little applicator, and you pop this little end off, and then you squeeze the plunger, and it squeezes out the same amount of both A and B of your resin, and then you squeeze them into a little cup and you mix them up just like you do epoxy resin, and then it cures within 24 hours just like epoxy resin, because it is an epoxy resin. This is kind of labeled for craft and hobby use, and it's labeled for, you know, filling like jewelry bezels and things like that. It's a pretty good resin, and you know, if you're just wanting to try a little bit of resin just to, you know, get your feet wet, I do recommend this little thing. It's usually about $14, something like that, I think. And you know, the only thing about this is that it comes in, you know, the plunger is usually about that full, and you want to squeeze out at least half of your plunger to get a good mixture, a good ratio. If you try squeezing out just a little bit, you're probably not going to get a good mix or a good, because even though this does push down at the same time, sometimes one side will go down a little slower than the other because one's a thicker liquid. So you just kind of have to use at least a half a plunger on that so that you can get enough of both sides so that it will mix properly and cure properly. If you try to use less than that, you might get something that doesn't cure. But it is a good little, you know, quick and easy, no mess kind of a epoxy resin. If you just want to try it for the first time, if you just want to do like a couple of little tiny projects and you don't want a big bunch of resin, this is a good option for you to try that. So the second kind of resin that I'm going to talk about is UV resin. So there are a lot of different kinds of UV resin, you know, because of its popularity. The UV resin is only good for small applications, very tiny little molds, or for doing kind of like fill-in work, or in use with your epoxy resin, or as kind of a glue to glue two pieces of resin together. You can use that with a light. But UV resin is just that. It is a UV cure resin. So a UV light, just a second. So any UV light will cure these, even sunlight. So if you don't have like a fancy light or something, you could set your resin piece out in the sunlight and it will cure with the sun's rays. But it needs to be kind of a strong sunny day, and it does take longer than if you have a lamp. So this is just like a cheap little nail lamp. It's a UV nail lamp, you know, designed for curing your nails, and that works great. This is the one I use most of the time. You can get these little UV torches. That's what they, you know, it's basically a UV flashlight, but they call it a UV torch. And this one is a big one. So it has quite a bit of strong light. And I use this for like quick curing, like for if I'm gluing two pieces together and want to quick cure them so that I can then place them under my lamp. So I always use my lamp for a final cure, and then these I just use for more of a quick cure. They've also got little tiny ones. The battery's almost gone in this one, but you can get these little ones. These work as well. So any kind of a UV light. They have even larger UV lamps that are like big ones that you can get if you're planning on using UV resin a lot. UV resin is a lot more expensive than epoxy resin. And you can't use it in large pores. It just does not work. It is for tiny pores, small things, like, you know, tiny things. Anything larger than an inch is probably not going to work with your UV resin, an inch thick. So this is a one kind. This is Lamino. You can get this on Amazon. I think it's like, I think this was around $25 for this 200 gram bottle, somewhere around there. This is the Sophie and Toffee version. This says for use with silicone molds. There are two kinds of UV resin. There's usually a hard type, and then there's usually some kind of either soft type or like something that says for use with silicone molds. And it's kind of like in between the hard and the soft, and it kind of fills in that gap. You can get UV resins that are colored. They're already colored for you. Like this is black, this is magenta, this is royal blue. So they do come in smaller amounts, like 10 grams, I think this is. Yeah, it's 10 grams. And these are, you know, somewhere around maybe $10 or something. And, you know, you kind of get this little amount. You can also get them that size in clear as well. You know, and they come in different shapes. These are different. These are UV resins as well. This one's blue. This one's purple. So yeah, I mean, they can come in all different kinds of, you know, containers and stuff. But UV resin is pretty much the same if it's made for craft purposes. Now there is a UV resin. This is a photopolymer resin, which is basically UV resin, and this is actually made for 3D printers. 3D resin printers, and this stuff is a little tricky. You can use it for some things, but it's not really meant to be cast. It's specifically engineered for the 3D printers. But I got it just to play with it and see what it does and how it works. So there are some that aren't meant for craft purposes. So, you know, make sure you stick with the ones that are made for casting and stuff. So the UV resins, they're a nice addition to have in your stock, but most of the time you will probably be using epoxy resin. Now it's a fun draw to be able to make something really quick with UV resin and be done with it, but the UV resins are a little more tricky sometimes, and you can't use them for large projects. And by large, I mean if you wanted to cast something that was this big, UV resin would not do it. It just doesn't work, and you get a lot of like warping, and it gets too hot, and it can ruin your mold. And you want to, you know, anything larger than that, you want to stick with, you know, an epoxy resin. So hopefully I've covered the differences and the different types of resins. There is another kind of resin, which is a white cure resin. There's generally a fast cure resin. I haven't used that, and the reason I haven't used it is because the research that I have done on it is, you know, it cures white, so any colorant that you add to it is going to become pastel, which is fine if you're looking for a pastel piece. Anything that doesn't cure clear will be, you know, have some effect on your coloring process. Also, the white cure is usually very fast cure, so you have very little time to work with it. And the way that I like to use my resins is I like to mix them and then let them set so that the bubbles can kind of dissipate a little bit before I pour them into my molds. You can't do that with the white cure resin because it cures so fast. So, you know, if you're going to try the white cure, that's up to you, but, you know, just be sure you do your research, find out, you know, watch some videos on people talking specifically about white cure resin. And so hopefully this has given you some ideas and understanding of the different kinds of resin that are out there and what their uses can be and what you can do with them. Hopefully this series will help you guys, anybody that's starting out that is new to resin. I'm not an expert, but I have a lot of understanding and a lot of practice with it. So I've kind of gotten through some of that beginner angst. So hopefully you guys can get some information from this and the upcoming episodes in my How to Resin series. And thank you so much for watching. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.